Hey guys, Will here. So Fanatec have just released their new Clubsport Handbrake V2. Now I know a lot of people are quite excited about this new product because the version 1.5 has been around for quite some time now. And those of you who own these ones would know this is a position-based handbrake as opposed to a load cell handbrake, which is what we have with this new one here. So I think there's gonna be two types of people that are gonna be interested. Those who are looking at maybe upgrading from the 1.5, and of course those of you who might be looking to buy your first handbrake. Now there are quite a few nuances here, a few things you need to understand in terms of compatibility as well, particularly if you are a console racer. So in today's video I'm going to give you all the information that I think you guys need to know to make an informed decision on the new Clubsport Handbrake V2. So let's dive in. Okay, so my aim is to keep today's video as short as I possibly can, but before we get started, there are just a couple of quick housekeeping things that you do need to be aware of. So firstly, thank you to Fanatec for sending across their handbrake for us to check out. As you'll see in today's video, we will be cross-comparing this against a couple of other handbrakes as well, so it's important you guys are aware that all the products that you'll see in today's video were all provided to us under the exact same conditions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video, we do have some affiliate links available. Those are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Booster Media without it costing you an extra cent, so we really would encourage you to use those if you find what we do here of value and you want to help us out. And at the moment, if you're watching this video on the day that it goes live, we are right in the middle of Black Friday sales as well. So we do have a couple of Black Friday pages on our website that outline all of the various different discount codes available to get you the best possible price on a whole variety of sim racing gear. So check that out via boostermedia.net as well if you are looking to pick up anything in Black Friday. But as is always the case here, everything we're going to be talking about today is purely just my own observations and my own opinions of this product and all the other products that we're comparing it to. So with all that said, let's start off now talking about some pricing and compatibility information. So let's quickly cover off compatibility first, because there are a couple of important things here to understand. So this handbrake can be used in conjunction with any Fanatec wheelbase. That means that if you have an Xbox compatible wheel on your Fanatec wheelbase, the handbrake will also be Xbox compatible when connected through the wheelbase. On a PlayStation, it's a little bit different. You've got to have a PlayStation compatible wheelbase. You can use any wheel that you want, and when you connect the handbrake through the wheelbase, it will then also become PlayStation compatible. On PC, you're going to be connecting this via your Fanatec wheelbase as well. If you don't own a Fanatec wheelbase, you do have the option of connecting this via an optional accessory, which is one of the things I'm gonna have a bit of a whinge about in today's video. You do have to purchase an optional accessory to give you a USB connection to connect to your PC if you don't have a Fanatec base or Fanatec pedals. So just be aware of that. These aren't particularly expensive. I'll drop a link to them down in the description box below. But yeah, just check your Fanatec pedals. If they have a handbrake port on them, or you do have a Fanatec wheelbase that has a handbrake port, then you'll be absolutely fine with this. You won't have to buy one of those. But if you are planning on running this as the only piece of Fanatec hardware on your sim rig, then you will need to purchase that optional adapter. So just be aware of that. Yeah, that is everything I think you need to know in terms of basic compatibility. So let's quickly run you guys through some pricing information now. So if you're in Europe or the US, you're looking at $109.95. In Australia, looking at $329.95. Obviously, just check your local taxes, import duties, and so forth. I have seen quite a few examples recently of people purchasing in the UK, not understanding that since Brexit, there are now import duties to bring products into the UK. So just be aware of any potential hidden costs there. So just to give you a little bit more context around the pricing, if we go back to the version 1.5 handbrake, which is by pretty much every metric an inferior product, let's just get that out there right now. But the most recent price outside of Black Friday sales for this guy was €129.95 or US dollars. At the moment, with those Black Friday sales that are going on at the time that we're making this video, this guy can be had for just $69.95 US dollars. So significantly cheaper than what you're paying for this guy. But of course, we'll give you everything you need to know to make the right choice between the two as we get on through today's video. If you're on PC, you do have a lot of other options as well. You've got things like the SimLab handbrake. This is just a small selection of a few of my favorites, but you've got the SimLab handbrake. That guy will set you back pretty much exactly the same price at around €200. If you want to step things up a little bit further, you've got something like the Husingveld handbrake, which we will be reviewing very soon here on the channel, so make sure you sub so you don't miss out on that. That guy will set you back about €280 at the time of making the video. So there certainly are options to go more high end if you wish to do so, but again, as we get through today's video, you should have a better understanding of whether it's actually going to be worthwhile to do that for your particular usage case. Now, there are, of course, a lot of other options out there as well. The Moser handbrake, for example, comes to mind at $99 US. There's also, of course, the Logitech G Pro RS combo handbrake and sequential shifter that we looked at just recently here on the channel as well. But look, ultimately, guys, I think what it's going to boil down to here is what ecosystem you're operating within. So say, for example, you're on a PlayStation, you've already got a Logitech base. you're probably not going to be switching all of your gear over to Fanatec just to get this handbrake. But you do just need to be aware that whether you're on an Xbox or a PlayStation, you are going to be locked into the ecosystem that you've already bought into. So you're not going to be able to just put one of these other handbrakes on the rig and have it all work. So look, before we dive into more detail around this handbrake, I will say that I think that's probably where this is going to be most compelling for those of you who are on a console and are looking for, you know, an upgrade to an existing handbrake or looking to buy your first handbrake. Those of you who are on PC, you do have a lot of other options available, which I would recommend that you check out before diving into this one. But we're going to go through everything and give you as much detail as we can today. So that's everything I think you guys are going to need to know in terms of pricing and compatibility. What are some of the key features of this new handbrake? So some of the things that they've called out in their marketing are the all metal construction here. Now the older handbrake was pretty much all metal construction as well, but look, some of the sheet metal that was used here was quite thin. And those of you who have used one of these handbrakes would know there is quite a bit of wobble and flex in that lever, which does certainly have an impact on the driver experience. Whether or not that's something that bothers you is, you know, a subjective thing, but it is certainly there. You can see this new handbrake is much more solid in its construction. The external shell and the actual arm of the handbrake are all made of cast aluminium, but you can see they are nice and chunky and there's no meaningful flex or movement anywhere within the construction of the unit itself. But look, the main call out feature here, as I touched on earlier on in the video, is the fact that this is using a load cell rather than the potentiometer that we had in the original handbrake. So what I'm going to do now is pop the clothes off both of these guys, give you a bit of a side-by-side comparison so you can see exactly what's going on here. So quick side-by-side comparison here, you can straight away see that there's a lot more going on internally with the new version than the older version. So with the version 1.5, let me just quickly lay this one down so it doesn't fall over and smash my iPad there. If you pull down on the lever, you can see a very simple mechanism. There's a spring just here. There's a little elastomer down here. That is purely just acting as a bump stop on the return. So it's not giving you any sort of resistance when you pull the handbrake. So it's literally just a movement from the minimum to the maximum like so. There is a slight increase in spring resistance as you pull the lever down, but there's no threshold point here to allow you to actually modulate your brake input based on the amount of force going into the handbrake. So it's purely just a position-based input. And that is something that you'll find if you're doing the type of driving that requires you to make adjustments to the slip angle of the car or how much the car's sliding as you're going around a turn, then that is a lot easier, generally speaking, to do with a load cell than it is with a position-based system, simply because in general terms, you do have more precision in your muscle control when you're making an input based on the amount of force that you're applying rather than the physical position. Now, of course, you can establish muscle memory, and you know, I don't think that inherently somebody that's done a lot of training on this handbrake is going to find themselves to be quicker on something like this, but it will mean that you're able to adapt more quickly to different types of cars or different styles of driving and so forth. That's going to be the main benefit in terms of the impact that it has on your driving, stepping up to a load cell from a position-based system like this. But yeah, in terms of the actual feeling, we'll talk about this more in the driving experience in just a moment, but it does give you a lot more precision, a lot more control around that threshold point rather than it just being a 0 to 100% kind of input like what we have here. Now you can see in the corner there, you've got a little rotary potentiometer, basically the same thing as what you'd find as a volume knob on a stereo. As that rotates, the amount of resistance is increased or decreased, and that change in resistance is what's interpreted as the physical position of the lever. So that is how that all works. And you can see it's very simple in its design, quite effective for what it is. But yeah, there's not a whole lot going on behind the scenes there really. Now, if we have a look in more detail at this guy here, I'm just going to pop this little guy out here so we can have a closer look at exactly what's going on. I'll explain what that is in just a moment too. So what we have here, very similar mechanical design in terms of how everything operates. As you pull the lever down, this whole mechanism is going to compress just like what you have on the version 1.5. The big difference here being that this little metal plate that you can see down here is actually a load cell. And if we tip it upside down, you might be able to see there's a little cutout section there. Now that middle section of this load cell is what's called a strain gauge, and as that is deflected, as that's bent slightly, that deflection or that bend is actually what's detected as the amount of force that is being applied to the handbrake. So it's working effectively the same way as what a load cell in a set of sim racing pedals would do, or even your bathroom scales use a similar kind of concept to this. The more weight you put on the scales, or in this case, the more force you apply to the lever, the more that little tab is going to bend, and the more force is going to be interpreted as braking input inside the sim. So that is how that works. So you can understand now that fundamentally that's a different way of doing things to what we have with a position-based system. So you're probably already starting to figure this out, but if you're doing the style of driving where all you're doing is really just initiating a slide by grabbing the handbrake and pulling it, you're not going to notice a big difference in the actual driving experience between the two of these. It's really, like I said before, when you get into that precise style driving where you're really wanting to control the slip angle, that you're really going to notice more precision in something like this. So that's a basic rundown on the mechanical differences between the two here. here, let's put the version 1.5 aside now, and let's get into some more detail on exactly how this guy works, some of the adjustments and some of the other things that I think you need to know. So if you have watched the video up to this point and you haven't skipped to this part, you should now have a fundamental understanding of what the load cell is and its function inside the handbrake. If you don't understand what I'm talking about here, use the timestamps down below to skip back to the part of the video, and that will all make sense to you. So what we have here, despite the complex look, is actually quite simple. We've got a rod that's going down that is connected to the bottom of the lever. So as you pull the lever, that is pushed down. There's then a little elastomer sitting between this perch here and the tab of the load cell that we looked at just before. As we pull down on the lever, as you can see in this footage here, that elastomer will start to compress. It will exert that force upon the tab that we see on that load cell. That will measure the input as we were talking about before. And that is quite simply all that there is to it. Now, one thing that I do want you to understand here is that that force is being exerted directly upon that tab of the load cell, as you can see. So there's no little tiny springs internally here that are allowing them to use a lower rated load cell like what we see on the Fanatec Forte pedals, which I know a lot of people had an issue with, although I didn't personally feel that it had a noticeable impact on the driving experience. In those kinds of designs, because the force that you're applying isn't being directly applied to the load cell, can be argued that it's not a true force-based system. So good to see that they have utilized this kind of design here. It keeps things nice and simple, and hopefully it'll keep the purists happy as well. So there are a couple of adjustments here that we can make to this stack. We have a little nut on the bottom here, which you can wind in and out, and that will actually shorten or lengthen the length of the arm here. So what that's effectively going to do is adjust the angle of the lever. Now there is a lever adjustment available too, which I'll show you in just a moment. But effectively adjusting the length of this part here is going to move the arm forward or back by 5 degrees. So that gives you a way to fine tune exactly the angle that you want within a 10-degree margin forward or back. We then also have this CNC machined aluminium perch here, which is basically what's pushing down on the elastomer. And this acts as a preload adjustment. So they include a little spanner that looks like this in the kit, and it's got little holes on here. You can see if you pull this forward or back, it is a little bit clumsy to operate without scratching it up. But if we move this forward or back, that is actually allowing us to adjust the preload on the elastomer. Now, if you do loosen off that preload by too much, what will happen is the assembly will become loose, or the elastomer will become non-captive. And when that happens, it's going to introduce some slop or some slack into the handbrake. So if you do find that there is a little bit of movement there shouldn't be, you will just need to wind in a little bit of preload onto that elastomer to eradicate that. So that is a good little adjustment to have. And what that'll effectively allow you to do is increase the amount of initial force that's required to get the handbrake moving. So if you prefer a little bit of a stiffer feel, you can wind in some additional preload there to achieve that. So a good adjustment there. You've then got this little shim, and you'll notice if you can get in there really closely with the camera, it's got 70 written on one side. You probably already figured this out. If you put this in, it's going to give you 70 millimeters of travel down from the 80. If you flip it around, it's got 60 written on the other side. So if we were to insert this like so, just clip it in like that, that is going to reduce the amount of travel available. So adjustment between 60 millimeters of travel and 80 millimeters of travel in 10 millimeter increments, if that makes sense. Now, one thing just to note here is that plastic shim, in our experience, does have a tendency to pop out if you pull really hard on the handbrake if you don't have the cover on it. Now, you can imagine if you're somebody that's wanting to adjust preload regularly, not that I think many people would want to do this, you might want to leave that cover off, so just be mindful of that. Not a big deal, I don't think, but just something that I do want you guys to be aware of. You will need to run the cover on the handbrake if you are planning on running the shim to reduce the throw. I found the best setting for me was actually 70 millimeters of travel, and I'll get into the reason why in just a moment, because one thing that you need to understand here is that because it's a load cell design, you're not hard limited to that maximum 70 millimeters of travel. You can actually pull a little bit further and modulate around, and that input will be registered by the load cell, unlike what we saw before with the potentiometer that maxes out at 100% and doesn't go any further. So that is all the mechanical adjustment available on the handbrake in terms of how it actually feels to operate. We do also have some additional adjustments in terms of mounting and angles and things like that too. So if we quickly unscrew this little piece here, now obviously it's not going to be this loose when you guys are actually operating, but I've just done it up finger tight so you guys can see. But we slide that guy out. So you can see there's 3 little notches on the arm here. Those interface with this little spacer in the middle here, and that allows us 6 different points of adjustment, so a more coarse adjustment than the 10 degrees of adjustment that we get from adjusting the nut on the back here. So you can see in slot number 1, the arm is going to be upright like that, slot number 2 like that, and then slot number 3 like that. We can then also flip the arm around as well, and that will give us even more. So if you're going to be mounting the handbrake parallel with the shifter arm on your sim rig, then you would mount in this orientation with the arm this way, and you can adjust the angle like so. If you're wanting to mount it perpendicular or flush with the wheelbase upright, then you would spin this around and mount it like so, and that pin would go back through. I'm going to actually flip it back around this way again now so that we can look at a couple of other things So to elaborate a little bit more on the subject of mounting now, we have a couple of different ways that we can mount this on our rig. We can bolt it directly to a piece of profile or a piece of plate using the 2 slots that are provided. So we've got one down the bottom here, which is 45 millimeters wide, and another one which is about 18 millimeters wide at the top here. What that's going to allow you to do when you bolt it onto the rig is give you a little bit of angle adjustment from side to side. So a lot of people, myself included, like to have the handbrake tilted slightly towards me so that when I pull it, it's a natural movement rather than me kind of having to go like that with my arm and pull it awkwardly. So plenty of angle adjustment there as well, which is a good thing. You then can also mount it to the side of your Fanatec shifter as well. So those of you who own one of these would know that it comes with some little T-nuts that you can put into the channels on the side here. And then the new shifter comes with this little bracket here. So what you can do is you can mount this on the side, and then that will allow you to mount the shifter onto the side of this as well. So you can imagine, again, you'd have this in the upright position for this style of mounting, but it can go on the side like that. You can also tilt it away from you if you want to have the arm pointing up this way, or towards you if you want to have it a little bit more towards you as well. Now, the other really good thing about this spacer, if you remember back to the previous handbrakes, one of the big complaints with these was when you mounted them side by side, the shifter actually bashes into the handbrake unless you have a spacer. And if you have a look at any of Jimmy Broadbent's older videos, you'll notice he's got a whole stack of washers between his handbrake and his shifter. That's the reason why, because the knob smacks into the handbrake if you go into 7th gear on the right hand side or reverse on the left hand side. Now I have a shorter throw shifter here, so it doesn't actually do it on this particular one, so I can't show you, but if I quickly put it into 7th gear here and push it down and click it in, you can see even with that shorter throw, it is very, very, very close. You can imagine if it was up here, it would be bashing into it. So yeah, with this, it also acts as a little bit of a spacer to move this a little bit further away from the side of the shifter. And you can see if we put the two side by side like that, it is nice and far away. It doesn't cause any issues. And look, although this is plastic, and you can see it does twist quite a bit if I bend it like this, it does actually have little metal inserts in each of the mounting locations. So when it's actually sandwiched together, it is very rigid and there's no meaningful flex there whatsoever. You will see a little bit of flex in this footage that we're showing here. That's actually the mount for the shifter and handbrake assembly on the rig, rather than any flex that's being introduced between the interface of the handbrake and the shifter. So nothing to complain about there. I think they've done a really good job in terms of mounting options, and they've got pretty much all bases covered. One thing that I think is a little bit unfortunate is that although you can get to the slot on the top here without removing that cover, you can't get to the one on the back. You will actually need to remove that cover to access that. And similarly as well, if you want to make any sort of adjustment to the preload or the fine adjustment of your angle, that 10-degree adjustment that we talked about before, again, you will need to remove that cover. Unlike a lot of other handbrakes like the Husingveld handbrake, the SimLab handbrake, you can see these are an open design that allow all those adjustments to be made very simply without having to remove any covers or anything like that. So look, just a different approach. I can certainly see some benefits here as well. It keeps dirt and debris out of the mechanisms, but the actual pivot point, if you have a look down inside, there is a sealed metal ball bearing, so you shouldn't have too many issues with dirt and debris causing any sort of change in the operation of this over time anyway. So yeah, all the right things in that regard. But one issue that we did have is that the holes in the cover here don't actually line up correctly, in our example at least, with the holes in the arm. Now you can see on the back here, there's a little recessed part which actually clips in here on the back, and then the front part sits in position, and you can see there's a little bit of an offset there between where the hole is on the cover and the actual tapped thread on the housing. Now, because this is cast aluminium, it is relatively soft, and unfortunately, again, in our particular example, the one of the screws, it was yeah, this one. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera very well, but when we removed that for the very first time, it was actually already stripped. And not only is the thread on the screw stripped, but the soft aluminium thread on the actual housing of the handbrake is also damaged. And that was like that straight out of factory. The first time we wound it out, yeah, we noticed that damage, and it was quite difficult to get back in again, obviously, as you can imagine. So I'm probably gonna have to re-tap that. There are, of course, gonna be some manufacturing tolerances there. The first thing I did was to check and see exactly where this came from to determine whether this might be like an early production sample that might be a little bit off. It did actually ship from the Australian warehouse where their stock is directly to us. So I don't believe this to be a pre-production sample. So look, I think the best way to deal with this is to ask you guys, if you do buy one of these, let us know in the comments down below whether you have a similar issue. That'll be the most accurate way of determining whether this is an isolated incident, which I'm hoping it is, or whether it's a more widespread thing. But do just be very careful with that. Anytime you're screwing into aluminium, particularly cast aluminium, it can be relatively easy to strip those threads out. And then finally, just in terms of the hardware, I do just want to quickly show you the little RJ port on the bottom here as well. So you'll remember earlier on in the video, if you haven't skipped past that part, I mentioned that you do actually have to purchase one of these optional adapters if you're wanting to run this as a standalone device on your rig. So if you don't have a Fanatec wheelbase or pedals that have a handbrake port, you will need to buy one of these. Now, it's not expensive, but look, I just don't see any reason really why they couldn't include a USB-C port on here as well as the RJ12 connection to connect through to your pedals or your wheelbase. I certainly can't imagine it would be an expensive thing to add. And look, I was surprised to see this because look, it is such a clean design otherwise. You know, I think it's going to be something that will deter people from buying this handbrake, even if they were looking for a standalone handbrake and they don't have any other Fanatec gear on their rig. So look, I can understand the reasons why they potentially want to lock you into their ecosystem, but I do think that they're alienating a whole part of the market there that may otherwise potentially be interested. But look, I mean, it is a relatively low cost to buy this guy anyway, if you do need one. But I just, again, want to reinforce that if you are looking at buying one of these as a standalone device, you will have a small additional cost for one of those adapters if you don't have Fanatec pedals or a Fanatec base that's compatible to connect directly. So just to quickly cover up a couple of other little things that I think you might be interested in: 262 millimeters in length from the top to the middle of the bolt just here. So as I mentioned before, I do have a short throw on my Fanatec shifter here, but even still, even with the standard one, it is going to sit quite a bit lower. I actually find that to be quite convenient because it means I can grab the handbrake and not kind of knock my hand on this on the way through. So you may like or dislike that, but I just want to make sure you're aware of it. They do also mention in their literature that the rubber grip that you see here is removable. Now, it certainly doesn't unscrew. The only way I can see to get that rubber grip off is to roll it off, similar to if you were removing a hand grip from a bicycle or a motorbike, for example. So yeah, I wouldn't really say that that is something that is removable, but I guess you could if you really wanted to. But I know there are a few people out there that do like to replace the knob with some more questionable designs, and that's not something that's going to be easy to do without some, you know, more serious sort of fabrication. So just one more little thing to be aware of. Of course, if you're looking at something like the Husingvelt handbrake, that has an integrated knob design, so obviously you're not going to be changing the knob there. But if you're looking at something like the SimLab handbrake, for example, that does just unscrew. Similarly with the Logitech as well, you can actually extend and shorten this guy. If you've seen our full review, you would know this already, but you can extend or shorten or remove that knob entirely and put something else on there if you wish to as well. So that covers off everything I think you guys need to know in terms of the hardware. What is this thing actually like to drive with? Let's unpack that now.
Left.
So what does this all mean in terms of the driving experience? Now, look, I think there's a couple of different ways that you can look at this. You can look at it from the perspective of somebody who is after that really granular control, somebody that's doing the style of driving like drifting or rally driving, where you really need to be able to modulate and control that input to really control the slip angle of the car. In those kinds of circumstances, if you're finding that you're just lacking that ability to really feel where you are and, you know, really be consistent with those inputs with something like the version 1.5 handbrake, then this is probably going to be a worthwhile upgrade for you if you can justify the cost. Now, there are, of course, other people out there as well that admittedly are probably more close to my skill level. That's, you know, really all you're doing is just grabbing the handbrake, reefing at it and initiating the slide. And then beyond that, controlling the slide with steering and pedal-based inputs and not really relying on the handbrake too much. So look, I think if you're at that kind of level, or you're doing the style of driving that just doesn't require that precision, then, you know, this is all pretty self-explanatory here. You're not really going to notice a massive difference, if really any difference at all, between this and something more entry level. So if you're looking for that precision and control, yeah, this makes sense. If you're not looking for that precision and control and you just need a handbrake, then you're really probably not going to benefit from spending the extra. So if you fall into that category, I would say it's not worth upgrading from the original to something like this. If you fall into the first category, then if you can afford it, then I think you will be satisfied with it. So in the scenario that you're driving on Xbox or PlayStation, where you are locked into an ecosystem and you're already invested in the Fanatec ecosystem, then yeah, if you're wanting that precision and control, then this certainly makes a lot of sense, and I think you'll be very happy with it. If you're on a PC though, I think it's a little bit more of a tough sell. I don't like the fact, as I said a couple of times now, that you have to buy that additional adapter if you want to plug it in as a standalone device if you don't have any other Fanatec gear that's compatible on your rig. And I just think that there are a lot of other compelling options available at this kind of price point that I think may be designed a little bit better than what this is. Some have a little bit more granular detail. If we have a look at the SimLab handbrake, for example, you know, this does have an elastomer and spring stack here. So it does give you a little bit more of a clearly defined threshold. threshold point than you get here. But look, I think it's one of those things that whatever you have, you're likely going to adapt to it. What's important is there is some sort of threshold point there to begin with. I just think that this is a cleaner overall design. I like the fact that everything is easily accessible and there's no covers to remove or anything like that. But I mean, you're not going to be mounting something like this onto the side of your Fanatec shifter, of course. So if you're needing those kind of mounting options, and this is where, you know, the ecosystem starts to come into play again. And you guys, hopefully you've got enough information from this video to really determine what's going to suit you best. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're really sort of trying to eke out that last few percent, maybe you're going to feel the difference in a more expensive handbrake or a hydraulic handbrake or something like that. For somebody at my kind of skill level, this is going to be more than enough for me. Look, to be completely honest with you guys, if I'm playing one of the more Simcade style games like WRC or Dirt Rally, for example, I don't notice a big difference between the old handbrake and the new one. If I'm doing something like dirt track racing, in iRacing though, I definitely do feel more precision and more control, and I am a lot quicker with this handbrake than I am with the old one, but I don't have well-established muscle memory in those scenarios with the old handbrake. For those of you who have established that muscle memory, you're probably not gonna find that you're gonna be a whole lot faster. What you will find is that you'll be more consistent when you're changing between different types of vehicles or different sims. And I think it's as simple as that, guys. So hopefully this video has given you all the information you need to know whether this is gonna be the right product for you. If you do decide you wanna pick one of these up or any other sim racing gear, do check out our discount codes and affiliate links available down in the description box below or at boostedmedia.net. We do have a whole bunch of Black Friday deals listed there as well to save you guys a little bit of cash, as well as some exclusive discount codes. So check that out regardless of what sim racing gear you're after. Hopefully you can find yourself a deal there. Thanks very much for watching, guys. And yeah, guys, leave a thumbs up if the video has helped you, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.